What is Brazil most known for? Carnivals, the Amazon rainforests, battered.
Ugh. She's got ponta.
It's a colourful and vibrant nation where expression isn't just advised, it's demanded. And that's a view reflected in its country's football. Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, R9, and from pulling off rainbow flicks to pulling off items of his sister's clothing, Neymar. Some of those skillful and technically gifted players of all time originate from this beautiful nation. Well, that was until recently. Joelinton, Andre, Bento, Andreas Pereira.
Not even from Brazil, blood. The man there's from Harrow, blood.
Anthony has 16 caps for this nation, bro. What the heck is going on? His skill move is tumble dryer simulator. He shouldn't be anywhere near the Brazilian national team. This man wouldn't last 6 minutes in the cages of South London, let alone on the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. It's a depressing regime that's led to a shocking spiral of negative results, leading to them basically being Argentina's little cousin over the last few years. But what exactly happened to Brazilian football? Before we get into this one, just want to say, again, looking to hit 750,000 subscribers soon. I will be testing out my knee injury when that happens. And if you're a lover of Brazilian football, slap a like on the video. It really, really does help me out quite a lot. More than you would realize. YouTube algorithm warriors assemble. Before we get into the nitty gritty of what exactly is going on here and why, I just need you to take a look at the most recent squad they brought on international duty and take a journey with me right here. Because I'm not gonna lie, a couple of people playing in Ballers League right now might start for Brazil. PK Humble's done more stepovers than Joelinton in his life before. The truth of the matter is, 3 players playing for Wolves getting into Brazil's national team when Wolves are currently sat 17th in the Premier League should have alarm bells ringing. Their manager will have been depressed walking around the city, realise he's got a scout in the area of Wolverhampton to see all of his midfield play. Now, whilst Matheus Cunha's on a sabbatical from having an Instagram breakdown to get in amongst international duty here, he is someone that's very much in form and I think would be seen almost as like an exciting inclusion to a nation if he wasn't the norm. Joao Gomes and Andre, also Wolves midfielders, are also in this team. Alexandro's probably getting wheeled out of a random nursing home in Brasilia to be involved in a Brazilian national team at this point. They had an Edison in the most recent squad, and it wasn't even the goalkeeping one. Though theoretically on current form, he probably shouldn't be in the team either. Imagine being a Brazilian seeing Fred get called up to the national team in the year of our Lord 2025. I genuinely thought Lucas Moura had retired by this point. He wasn't called up in the most recent squad, but was genuinely called up in the last, 6 months. We should actually consider detaching Brazil from the rest of South America for some of the crimes to skillful players like on show with these squads. They'll be trying to juju Neymar's knee back together in the medical department to see him playing for another 2 World Cups. Never before has a Brazilian national team had so many players in it that only have 3-star skill moves on FIFA. The elasticos per capita of this country has got to be at an all-time low. It's Samba football. Chris Samba football, as a whole, which I think is overall actually surmised by the lack of Ineos in the team at the moment. I know I'm talking about this squad quite a lot, but it is genuinely so baffling to me as a kid who grew up watching Brazil be so skillful, be the most exciting football team on the planet to watch, and we've got one Ineo in the team, bruv, and it's Savinho. He didn't even go by Savinho till he signed for City. I mentioned age when it comes to Alexandro, but then you've also got the issue of age when it comes to their front line. A front 3 that usually has a combined age of about 26, and Rafinha's 28, so work that one out. Endrick, Estevao, teenagers. And a focal point of Vini Jr., who's got 6 goals in 39 games for Brazil. That is disastrous, given how good Brazil are compared to other CONMEBOL nations, and the position on the pitch that he plays, and how good he is for his club. We're talking about a Ballon d'Or contender here. He's got 6 goals in 39 from the left-hand side. This man will do anything in a morning other than score for his nation. But it hasn't always been like this for Brazil. As I mentioned at the start, Brazil, as someone growing up, was a team that I wanted my own team to play like. They embodied everything that beautiful football, or jogo bonito, should really be about. There was adverts on TV of Ronaldinho, Roberto Carlos, Ronaldo, Rivaldo and co. doing unthinkable skill moves in a dressing room. And then they go out and back it by beating everybody. And not just beating them, but beating them by playing beautifully. A sheer undiluted version of skill and flair that made you genuinely fall in love with football. I mean, ask anyone who's between the ages of 32 and 23 who one of their favorite players is of all time. And I can guarantee you 80%, 90% of them, top 3 is Ronaldinho. Sorry, that was a a very, very, like, on-the-nose stat, but you know what I'm trying to say. Everybody loves Ronaldinho, apart from Brazilian passport control. But that hasn't been the case for a while. They haven't beaten everybody for a while, because they haven't won the World Cup since 2002. Now, inherently, winning a World Cup is kind of hard, okay? To be the best country in the world at football, a lot of things have got to go your way. Often, we go to a tournament and say, yo, France are the favourites, or yo, Spain, or Germany, or Italy. Italy, half the time, don't even qualify. And then when we get to it, Brazil can get knocked out by a Switzerland, Germany can get knocked out in a group stage, and suddenly you have no clue what's going on. Tournament football is often full to the brim of shocks and surprises. But there's one key theme here, and it's that Brazil, when it gets to the knockout stages, when it gets to the real nitty-gritty games, do find it difficult. They've only actually progressed past the quarterfinals once since 2002, and that was at their home Brazilian tournament in 2014, where they held back shots from German Frankfurters in probably the most embarrassing and darkest day in Brazilian football, losing in your own backyard 7-1 to the eventual winners Germany. They also lost the third place playoff. They might as well have gone out in the quarters, genuinely. So that's going out in the quarters in 2006, 2010, 2018, and 2022 after such an impressive qualifying campaign for the most recent tournament in Qatar. But why has that been happening, especially recently? Ultimately, if you're to look at some of the players involved in these tournaments, you know, we're going to look at David Luiz as a, you know, Brazilian centre-back for a long time. He played a number of games for Brazil. He actually got 57 caps in total between 2010 and 2017. So he was like a stalwart of Brazil's defense for 7 years, okay? But despite that, we're never going to look back at David Luiz and think, wow, he was one of the icons or one of the greats in terms of Brazilian defenders. And we're not going to do the same for Fred when it comes to a striker. And we're not going to do the same for Gabriel Jesus. And we're probably not going to do the same for Richarlison. And these players would continue to let Brazil down, not Gabriel Jesus and Richarlison, to be fair, they were still like 12 at the time, at Copa America 2016. This is just 2 years after the World Cup that Brazil have hosted. They'd be looking to bounce back in their own continent, only to go out in the group stages in a group that included Peru, Ecuador, and Haiti. That is a bad group, I'm gonna be honest with you. Ecuador at the moment, actually a pretty decent side, but back then, they're probably about as good as Peru, and Peru were middling of the continent anyway. If you're Brazil, you should look at that group and say that's 9 points guaranteed. You're gonna duppy Haiti, and they did. You're gonna beat Ecuador, and you're gonna beat Peru. Probably by 2 goals, at least, for all of those games. Now, this is then when they brought in Brazilian coach Chiche, who in fairness did turn their fortunes around quite a bit, had them playing well, had them winning games on the bounce consistently, especially in South American World Cup qualifying, and just in general CONMEBOL football. Again, as I've mentioned already, when it comes to World Cups, they wouldn't make it past the quarterfinals, but he instilled nice football, although a lot more defensively rigid than back in the day, and in the end, results would be alright, but then when he dipped, things fell apart once again. They'd win one Copa America under him, but for the Copa America of 2024, they'd go out in the quarterfinal stage to Uruguay on penalties. And this wasn't just an accident, they didn't look very convincing throughout the entire tournament. They drew to Colombia, which isn't that bad of a result, but the performance was dismal, and even Costa Rica, who, to be fair, almost got out of that crazy World Cup group as well. These are teams that can do a job against you. Again, international football is very, very unpredictable compared to league football, but as Brazil, you have to be disappointed with the way these teams were playing. They've gone out in the quarterfinals of Copa America. Do you know how many countries there are in CONMEBOL? It's barely even 8, like, to actually make a quarterfinals. You know, realistically, in terms of quality ones, so to go out that early is criminal. Even more concerningly, their World Cup qualifying campaign for the 2026 World Cup has been disappointment after disappointment. There was actually a spell or a phase at one point where it looked like they might actually not qualify, or it certainly wouldn't be a guarantee. They'd have to be fighting for it, which again is crazy that the World Cup is being expanded. Next time, let's not forget, there's even more places than ever to be at it. They drew to Uruguay during this run, then drew to Venezuela and lost to Paraguay, and their squad for Paraguay was not even that weak. It included Alisson, Marquinhos, Bruno Guimaraes, Endrick, Vinny, and Rodrigo. But then most recently was the disastrous cherry on top of an absolutely calamitous cake, where in a game before kickoff, Rafinha said fuck 'em about Argentina's players, instilling even more fight and desire into his own side, only to get absolutely slapped 4-1. Now, Argentina versus Brazil is about as close as you can get to a local fierce, like, club derby for international football. They're two extremely competitive and combative and successful footballing nations. Argentina, at the end of the day, are the reigning world champions, so it's never going to be an easy game, but to get slapped about like this is borderline disrespectful in a game that matters so much to the Brazilian people. This is an El Clasico for people with a gambling addiction that still bet during international breaks. It was a bit of an embarrassing result, and now look, I know the squad wasn't too great going into it. It was missing quite a lot of key names, including both of Brazil's top goalkeepers. Gabriel of Arsenal wasn't in this team, as well as Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle, but it would lead lead to them finishing 4th in World Cup qualifying, behind Uruguay and a shock in Ecuador, level with Paraguay and barely ahead of Colombia. So we've got a disastrous World Cup qualifying campaign where they look middle of the rank for South America, which is going to get you a round of 16 at best for the next World Cup probably. And when they face up against other elite nations, they get battered. So what exactly is going on? Why has there been such a decline in Brazilian football over the last few years or even over the last 2 decades? Well, the first thing we're going to tackle is why they're not the same, why they are so different from the squads of 1996 or 98 or 2002 or even the 60s and the 70s. The world of football has changed a lot. Now, I know this is like the most obvious answer, and this is one that you probably have thought about before, but it is true. A lot of Brazilian stars find themselves in Europe by the time they're even turning 19. Vini and Rodrigo don't feel like, traditional Brazilian players because, well, they were at Real Madrid, like, as teenagers, by about 18 years old. Endrick was still doing RE exams when he signed on the dotted line for Los Blancos. Eder Militao, Gabriel Magalhães of Arsenal, and also Marquinhos are kind of the same. None of these Brazilian youngsters had a chance to even taunt a defender before they were being flown on a plane to Spain, France, or England. And this means they're experiencing, from a very young age, pragmatic coaching, meaning a lot of the flair and unpredictability of these youngsters is being carved away by European coaches who care more about systems, being defensively rigid, and having a part to play within a squad rather than taking on 4 defenders all in one go at the same time. European systems demand them to be a bit more solid and be a bit more intelligent, and because they're joining those systems so early, as I said, that original Brazilian flair they might have had at like 14 or 15 is gone in an instant. And they don't get to experience Brazilian freedom because they're leaving so early. There's not much money in the game for Brazil and Brazilian clubs in comparison to European powerhouses, which is ironic because these Brazilian clubs are getting paid handedly very regularly for 18 and 19-year-old youngsters, and that money just seems to disappear or not get used very well. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the Brazilian leagues were some of the best in the world, if not the best in the world. And even since the era of Neymar at Santos, where, imagine Neymar now. He'd be in a Real Madrid academy by 15. He was still playing for Santos very late in comparison to his overall hype and quality and how long people knew he was going to be a star. You had Ganzo, who basically stayed too long, arguably. People like Lucas Moura as well. Even since then, the amount of time that Brazilian youngsters stay in Brazil is so much lower because the finances, the wages, the money just isn't there for them. Back in 2002, half the Brazil squad still played in Brazil, including goalkeeper Dida and star man Kaká. And Ronaldinho had only left like a couple years before. Meanwhile, in the most recent squad, you got about 6 or 7, but that's only because they were playing quite a few fringe players and experimenting. Usually it's as low as 2 or 3. It's hard to keep the usual Brazilian skillful identity amongst a set of 11 players who haven't played in Brazil for 5 to 15 years. And this brings us on to the next point, which is the overall squad quality. A shout out to Tifo Football, who made a video on Brazil last week, which is annoying because I had this video on my list for fucking time, but I was waiting for the Champions League and Premier League to stop being so schizophrenic. But either way, they basically suggested the Brazilian squad is good. Now, who am I to disagree with Tifo Football? Okay, they do a very good job. I love that channel with a burning passion, okay? But I do kind of disagree. This is nowhere near a golden generation of Brazilian sides. We all know that. Aside from superhuman depth in goal, which is kind of redundant at a time because you're only allowed to play 1 goalkeeper, although I'm pretty sure Edison could play in midfield realistically. Good depth in fairness at centre-back. I think centre-back at the moment for Brazil is far stronger than it was, say, at the 2014 World Cup with the likes of Gabriel, Eder Militao, and Marquinhos, as well as 2 world-class wingers. Whatever you think of Vini Jr., there's a reason he's in Ballon d'Or contention, and Rafinha is having the season of his life. No, I know. I've just stated that 5 of the 11 spots on a football pitch are elite or world-class. The problem is, the drop-off from that point is near enough catastrophic. With the exception of Bruno Guimaraes, their midfield is nowhere near good enough to actually be winning World Cups, even a Copa America, to be honest with you. Midfield is the most important position on the pitch. If you're getting dominated in the middle, you're going to get dominated everywhere. Sounds kind of crazy as a sentence. And also a very young set of strikers that aren't really anywhere near hitting their potential yet. At the end of the day, this squad, right, is summarized that for every Gabriel, there's a Gabriel Jesus. And for every Vini Jr. or Rafinha, there's an Alex Tellez. That's another issue. Wingbacks. Jesus Christ. There's no good wingbacks in Brazil anymore. But whilst there's excitement about, Endrick, for example, who I do think is going to be an amazing striker, and Esteban, who I think is going to be a quality winger, it doesn't also feel like there's that much in the way of hype for anybody else in the Brazil system right now. It doesn't really feel like there's a massive influx of Brazilians between the age of 16 and 20 that are going to fill out the rest of that squad. Otherwise, we just have the same thing that Neymar had, where he's having to balance an entire nation and their expectations on his shoulders, when in reality, the rest of the side is not really good enough to give him the promised trophies that he deserves. And another thing ultimately for Brazil is coaching. They've insisted on a Reform UK approach of keeping all foreigners out. If you even so much as think about having to apply for a visa and also apply for the national team job, they'll have you deported quicker than Donald Trump supporters can say El Salvador. So don't worry actually too much, you got quite a lot of time genuinely on that one, scarily. As I mentioned earlier, Chiche was impressive for Brazil. He earned them a Copa America title and he always made them look respectable and as if they could go on and win a World Cup. They didn't, they ended up going out in the quarterfinals, but other Brazilian candidates since have been pretty poor. But where has this quality gone? That is, I guess, the main kind of issue here. It's worth noting again, they're not terrible. Okay, I'm not trying to say Brazil are an awful team right now. I mean, I kind of was saying that at the start, but again, it's more relative to the Brazil of old. There's still 5-6 class players in this team that would start in most Champions League squads. But the overall depth and entire starting 11 that you used to get, when you look at like France, or you look at Argentina now, or you look at even England or Spain, you can kind of look at all of those starting 11s, maybe Germany thrown into the mix as well, and go, all 11 of those players are like quality, absolutely quality. And then there's a rung below, and that's where you find like Belgium, I'd say at the moment, maybe not even actually, a lot of their good players are getting on now, but I'd say that's where you find Italy, and then that's also where you find Brazil. Brazil have never really been that rung below. And ultimately, there's one other further issue we haven't spoken about, and that's Brazilian domestic football, which realistically probably deserves a video all of its own, but is, in all honesty, kind of in the bin. Both in terms of actual quality, in comparison to what it was maybe 20 years ago, but also in terms of scheduling. I mean, fucking hell, these lot are playing like 80 games a season. You've got kids that are breaking into Palmeiras or, you know, Flamengo, Botafogo starting 11s at the age of like 17, and then playing 80 games a season. They're getting injured, it's hurting their development, they're burning out quicker, and it's also a league season that completely clashes with Europe's as well, because they play all the way through a calendar year instead. And that, combined with a lack of finances, is driving Brazilian, like, youngsters and wonder kids to, yes, top 5 nations, but also nations below that. Like, maybe the Netherlands or Portugal, understandable, but even places like Moldova, Ukraine, Romania, which nothing against those nations, but they don't have a higher footballing heritage than Brazil does. And this is stunting a lot of players that are currently playing in Brazil, in terms of their overall ability and also longevity in the game. And combine that with an identity crisis of how the Brazilian FA wants its Brazilian players to play, and there's no real cohesion or understanding on how to win stuff anymore. You know, Brazilian fans are kind of disillusioned by what they're watching because it's not the Brazilian of old, but Brazil doesn't really know how to actually go out and beat European teams because they're not really sure how to advance past or advance to that level, like on a tactical or defensive solidity perspective. And I think until Brazil, as a country, as a footballing nation, as an FA, works out how to deal with the Europeanifying, I guess, of its young players, it's probably not going to succeed. I mean, we just saw them bring in a ban on standing on a football after Memphis Depay showboated in a Brazilian league match. If that's not a country struggling to identify itself, then I don't know what is. At the end of the day, Brazilian football should be, you know, encouraged to be as skillful and flairful and vibrant and exotic as it possibly can be. But at the moment, they and their young players don't seem to know what that is right now. If there's anything that I've missed out, drop it down below. Why do you think Brazil are struggling on an international basis a bit more than usual? Again, I want to clarify, they're not awful. They could still reach a Copa America final, but they're not the Brazil of old. That though is going to wrap up today's video. If you have enjoyed, feel free to slap a like on it, and of course subscribe if you're new to the channel. You can also follow me on social media. It is at @theofficialfng on Twitter, Insta, and on TikTok. It's been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a wonderful day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.